What's up, everybody? It's Trey Smith with College GameTime, back with another episode of the College GameTime podcast. I have a lot to get through today. I'm going to go through 4 potential outcomes. All right? 4 potential outcomes that, the likelihood of each of them, I'll let you debate and decide that. But just as far as what's the latest right now with the ACC and Stanford and Cal still not letting that door close. SMU even being in the mix there still. We got politicians jumping in with Condoleezza Rice and George W. Bush and whoever else. So I just put together 4 potential outcomes. And what I'm going to do in this episode is really break down how does this impact the American Athletic Conference? How do each of these outcomes impact the AAC? Because it's easy to see all these different outcomes and all these different ideas and all these different maps and all these different suggestions and all these different scenarios and rumors that get thrown around. And you see it and go, oh. And typically, what does a fan do? They look at it and see, is my team included? And if their team's not included, they get mad, they get angry, they go, this isn't true, and they look for something else to try to disprove the one that didn't include their team. Or they look at it and see that their team is included, and they say, yeah, this is what's going to happen. Is this what's going to happen? Do you have a source? How do you know? And they just go fight tooth and nail to try to make that scenario true that includes their team. Or if it doesn't include their team, they fight tooth and nail to try to disprove it. And so for me, though, as someone that's kind of looking at it from a holistic approach, as far as the whole conference is concerned, I'm just going to go through and break down how each of these outcomes, obviously will impact those teams involved, but how does it really impact the American Athletic Conference? So before I get into it, if you're watching on YouTube, you see the screen. Actually, I think it's on that side. I don't know if it's on which one. I probably look stupid right now with the overlays up there, but I'm pretty sure it's right here, maybe. Like, subscribe, comment at the end, share it with a friend. And if you're listening on one of the streaming platforms and you didn't see anything I was just doing with my hands, good for you. It's probably a good thing. But please rate and review, 5-star rating, give it a review. Shout out to the folks that have been rating on Apple Pods. I appreciate that sincerely. I saw some of them this morning, and I appreciate those words of encouragement. And I'm happy to be here, establishing myself as one of the voices, hopefully the voice of the American Athletic Conference. And then we'll see how realignment plays out and kind of figure out where we go from here. But let's get into it. So, potential outcome number 1 is Stanford goes elsewhere. I've been saying that Stanford is the ultimate domino for over a week now, and they are. And so this first outcome is Stanford goes elsewhere and Cal rides their coattail. Now, what's the most obvious option for that is the ACC. And it sounds like here in the next 24 hours, we may know something. I don't know how valid that rumor is, but do we know how valid any of these rumors are? But it does seem like we're going to know, for sure or not, if the ACC thing is a real deal for Stanford and Cal. But as I've been saying, if it's closed, they're going to take another shot at the Big Ten. Or going independent is still an option. So for this first outcome, we're just going to imagine that Stanford and Cal, they're not committed to rebuilding the pack. They're out. Whether that's going independent, whether that's going to the ACC, or whether that's going to the Big Ten, that's option number 1. So then what does that mean for Oregon State and Washington State? Well, it means that they're likely going to have to join another conference. Or does Oliver Luck, who we found out on yesterday's episode, there is their consultant, his clients are Oregon State and Washington State. Does Oliver Luck work his magic with Brett Yormark in the Big 12 and try to get those 2 schools in there? I know that's not on Brett Yormark's radar right now. I know he's thinking eastward. I've been saying this for over a month now, almost all summer. He wants UConn. I've been very consistent and adamant about that. It's just, the way it worked out, he's able to get all the 4 corner schools. That's what was going to get the most, votes to get everybody in, yada, yada, yada. Well, now I feel like he's going to use that as leverage to go expand in UConn being one of his prime targets. But ESPN could step in, knowing they don't have that time zone. They could come in and say, hey, listen, we'll bring them in at a full share, blah, 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 whatever it is, and somehow make it enticing enough to where Brett Yormark's like, all right, let's bring these guys in. Do I think there's a high likelihood of that happening? No, I don't. But I also know Oliver Luck is very good at what he does, and he's going to fight and advocate for the best possible option for his 2 clients, which are Oregon State and Washington State. And objectively speaking, what would the best landing spot for those 2 schools be if Stanford and Cal go elsewhere? Well, it would be the Big 12. The Big 12 is off the table, as pretty much everybody assumes it is. We've got the Mountain West and the AAC. Now, I made a video last Wednesday exploring what it would look like for these 2 teams to join the AAC, and I was making a case how the exposure and the revenue they could get in the American Conference would outweigh the geographical concerns that would be alleviated by joining the Mountain West Conference. You can go back and watch that video. I don't want to rehash it all out right here, but I did. Now, last Thursday, the day after I made that video, I received some information that as far as the American Conference was concerned, it would be all or nothing. In other words, it was going to be all 4 or none of them. And I put that up on Twitter after I received that info. But that information was contingent on that ACC door being closed. See what I'm saying? But now that ACC door is, I'm not going to say it's open, but it's not closed. It's kind of like cracked maybe. I'm still leaning towards, okay, if I'm a Resco, let's see what we can do to try to entice Oregon State and Washington State to join the conference. Let's see what we can do for them exposure-wise and revenue-wise. It's just my 2 cents. And yes, I'm obviously going to be pro AAC in how I do this, but I still think even from an objective standpoint, you could make a case that the exposure and the revenue of the American Conference would outweigh the geographical advantages of the Mountain West Conference. So that's outcome number 1. And let's move to outcome number 2. Outcome number 2 is the same exact as outcome number 1, except for SMU joins Stanford and Cal to the ACC. So it's still Stanford and Cal leaving, but it's them going to the ACC, and SMU is a part of that. So that's outcome number 2. Now, for the American Conference, it would suck to lose SMU. Let's just call it what it is. It would. I like SMU. I do still believe they have a national brand. I know, recent history, Dykes kind of put them back on the map, and Lashley's trying to kind of get them over that hump this season. But, since we all know SMU's history since the death penalty, right? But I still, there's that Southwest Conference part of me that remembers, this program that was a national powerhouse at one point. And even though they haven't been a national powerhouse anytime in recent history, they still have a national brand. I love them in the American Conference. So losing them to the ACC, it would suck. Would it be the end of the world? No. And that's what I want to talk about here. So if that happened, and you could find a way, and then, of course, it puts Oregon State, Washington State back in the same boat, right? Luck is going to obviously probably try to negotiate them back in to the conversation with the Big 12. But if that door gets closed, it comes back to the American Mountain West. And I just made the argument, or just address that. But what would make losing SMU like almost not bad at all is if you could parlay that into getting Oregon State and Washington State in your conference. Now, it makes it much more difficult to do that because you've just lost one of your Texas teams, and sort of potting your scheduling with the 4 Texas teams in Tulsa and then Wichita State in basketball is kind of part of that argument to help alleviate some of those travel concerns. But if you could find a way to swing that, Oregon State and Washington State lose SMU, I would take that. I would take that in a heartbeat, especially to get those 2 programs, those 2 fan bases in. and you're only losing this one. Oh, and by the way, you're probably going to get at least 17 million, if not 20 million, because we all know, it's pretty well noted, that SMU money is not an issue. In fact, if they do get into the ACC, it's going to be because they're paying their way in. So for them to pay their way in, they're going to have no problem paying their way out of the AAC. So there's another 17 to 20 million you can throw on top of the 50 million that you have from the departures of Houston, UCF, and Cincy. So you're getting some money in. It's not the end of the world. Even if you couldn't swing Oregon State and Washington State, it's still one team. You got 13 teams. And then you could look at either finding another expansion target and utilizing some of that money that you have in exit fees, or you could just double down on the investment in the teams that are still remaining. So that's outcome number 2. So outcome number 1 is Stanford and Cal go elsewhere, and it leaves Washington and Oregon State left by themselves. Outcome number 2, Stanford and Cal go to the ACC, and SMU joins them. And now outcome number 3, the Pac-4 stays intact, and they continue to try and rebuild through backfilling the Mountain West Conference in the AAC, which from the Pac's perspective, that's their number 1 option. They're doing everything they can to try to convince Stanford to stick around and rebuild. Everything we're seeing out of Stanford right now is showing that is not an enticing option for them. It's just not. If they say it is, their actions aren't showing that. Their actions are showing they're looking for anything else other than rebuilding the Pac. Whether that's the ACC, whether that's the Big Ten. And I'm not so sure they don't go independent if neither of those work out. But let's just say that's outcome number 3. They have to rebuild. Now, what's the latest rumor mill on this? Well, there's apparently 4 American teams that have made commitments to joining a rebuilt Pac. And the 4 are Rice, Tulane, SMU, and USF. You know, the AAU institutions and SMU. Now, here's a fact with that rumor. None of those schools have received an invite as of August 17th when I'm recording this show. So yes, I know the rumor is that they've made a commitment, but the fact is they have not received an invite. Here's what's interesting to me about this. A lot of the same people who act like it is just the dumbest idea to even suggest Oregon State and Washington State joining the American over the Mountain West for travel concerns are some of the same people that act like Tulane and USF would be making this awesome decision by joining a rebuilt Pac conference. I mean, the travel concerns, quite frankly, in that scenario for Tulane and USF are worse. And right now, the Pac has no media deal. I mean, I don't want to rehash all this stuff out again, but I've had some very basic questions for a rebuilt Pac looking to poach from the Mountain West and the American, which are, who's going to pay the exit fees? Obviously, it's the university's responsibility to pay those exit fees. But when I say that, what I mean is are they going to pay an exit fee? Like that's a high fee to pay for a lot of uncertainty to enter into. And then my second question is, who's the media partner? You know, is it Apple? 100% streaming? So are we so sure the American conference team who's getting exposure, linear coverage on ESPN, plus a decent payout? We don't even know what the payout would be in a rebuilt Pac with Apple. We're so sure that it would be a better situation to jump ship and join this conference that's rebuilding, and you're particularly Tulane or USF, and you're basically traveling to the other side of the country nonstop? Because you would think that, in addition to those 4, it's going to be some Mountain West schools that join or that they try to get, which even then, their buyout's even more. This option, I just don't see how it's going to happen personally. Not saying it won't happen, but it comes back to those 2 questions. Same questions I've been asking since last week. I said it earlier this week on 365 Sports show on Monday, and with David Smoke and those guys. And those are my questions. But how does this impact the AAC, right? Losing 4 schools. Like, let's just go down this route. Well, you're going to get about $70 to $80 million worth of exit fee money. The conference is not going to vote to dissolve. It doesn't work that way. Sure, other teams could jump ship if they get invites. And if you have enough teams leave, eventually the conference can dissolve. But it's not going to be a deal where 4 teams jump ship and the remaining 11 vote to dissolve. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So you're going to have $70, $80 million in exit fees that you can reinvest back into your remaining members, or you can use towards expansion. And like, look, man, you got Appalachian State, you got James Madison. I'll throw Texas State if you want to keep that Texas presence. Arkansas State. You got some schools in Louisiana. Like there are some options of some schools that you could look to bring in who could significantly become even more competitive if they had the additional resources of exposure and revenue. So I don't want to go too far down that simply because, I'm not so sure that's going to be a likely outcome. But, for those of you that think that, those 4 teams leaving would dissolve the conference. I mean, you tell me, you got $70 to $80 million worth of exit fee money coming in. You've still got a contract with ESPN. And sure, like, they may can exercise the clause to negotiate it down, but they're not going to do it immediately. They're going to give Oresco and the conference a chance to see, okay, what do they do? Just like they did when Houston, UCF, and Cincy left. Give them a chance to kind of recalibrate. And, I mean, you tell me, $70, $80 million contract with ESPN, does that sound like a conference that's going to dissolve itself? No. And then outcome number 4, which is my personal favorite, and that's just a full-blown merger. And I've made my case already, so I'm not going to make it again as to why I believe a full-blown merger with the American Athletic Conference would be the most seamless and best option to salvage the pack even. You take the 4 pack schools, merge them with the 14 American Athletic schools. You have 18 votes now towards the Auto 5 status. You retain your Auto 5 status. You have a media partner in place. The media partner that's in place needs the region that the remaining pack teams represent. It just seems like the perfect storm. I know Jim Williams said earlier today that a merger was not off the table, but it is a long shot from where we're at now. But what you all have to understand about realignment season is that long shots can become short shots overnight. Now, I'm not saying that means, there's a great chance there's going to be this merger I've been talking about. No. I'm just saying that even though it may be a long shot today, that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be a long shot tomorrow or even the next day. I think the ACC has to make their decision so that this Stanford domino can fall. I've been very adamant and very consistent on that. The Stanford is the ultimate domino. But, I think that outcome number 4 with the merger, like I said, you've got the AAC and the Pac-4. You got a media deal in place. You got the Auto 5 status intact. You got 18 votes to throw in the pot, and you got a chance to go snag a couple of Mountain West teams in 2025 to make that a more heftier conference with more of a West Coast presence as well. So that's it, man. Those are the 4 outcomes that I have that seem to be how this is going to play out. It seems like it's going to be one of those 4. And as you can see, regardless of which one it is, none of them are going to just completely rip the heart out of the American Conference. In fact, the worst one for the American Conference would be outcome number 3, which is if those 4 schools do in fact jump ship, which I am just so very leery of believing simply because of all the dynamics that would surround that. I mean, you don't know who your media partner is. You don't know what your revenue is going to be. The only media partner that's been rumored to this conference is exclusively streaming. So now you're taking a step back on exposure. I could understand it from a Mountain West. I still don't know if they're going to pay, the $32 million exit fee or whatever it is. But I could see from their vantage point, because you're almost certainly going to get more revenue. And then, the exposure piece, I don't know. I don't know that it'll be streaming only, but they have a pretty hefty load of streaming as it is. I shouldn't say that. I'm not as familiar with the Mountain West media deal. I just know it's with CBS and Fox, and I know that both of those outlets got a hefty dose of Power 5, Mountain, and Pacific Coast teams. So, yeah. But even in that outcome number 3 scenario, like I said, you're getting $70 to $80 million in exit fees to reinvest back into your conference. So let me know your thoughts below. Which outcome do you think is most likely? And do you feel like any of these, in your opinion, dissolve or destroy the American? Because I don't. I would love a scenario where Oregon State and Washington State get into the American Conference, just because I have genuinely enjoyed interacting with both of those fan bases, and I would love to continue doing so. We'll see how this plays out. We'll see what happens. I'll save that. I was going to say, I'm trying to come up with some ideas where if there is some division or there is some teams that defect, if there's a way to continue this podcast where it's like I just continue to cover the same pot of teams, all the American, but there's a lot to happen. There's still a lot of things a lot of dominoes that need to fall, and the main one being Stanford. And if this pans out where the only team the American loses is SMU, that's not the end of the world. If this pans out where the American loses SMU but gains Oregon State and Washington State, that's a win, in my opinion, for the American. And if this thing plays out, which it may very well do, where the American doesn't lose any teams and they don't gain any teams, that's a possibility as well. The ACC could say, all right, Stanford, Cal, you're in. SMU, you're not. But if they're going to let those other 2 teams in, at this point, they may as well let SMU in, especially if SMU is really willing to pay their way in for 5 years. Or the ACC keeps them out, and then the Big Ten, the Hail Mary to the Big Ten, opens its doors for Stanford. There's just a lot to be considered. And then, of course, I don't want to write off the chance of Oliver Luck working his magic to possibly getting that Big 12 door to open back up for Washington State and Oregon State. You just never know. So that's it. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. And I appreciate you watching. I appreciate the support. I appreciate the birthday love I received yesterday. And let's just keep driving this podcast to the top of the rankings. I think we are on track to becoming the #1 American athletic podcast. And I really enjoy my interactions with everybody, even those of you that disagree with me. You know what I'm saying? Like, when we can have healthy, respectful, agreeing to disagreeing type conversations, I love it. So that's it. Trey Smith, College Game Time.